Yeah, Radio Kosaten hashtag. The if you go onto the hashtag Radio, so yeah, yeah, that's what works. Yeah, yeah, different from graduate. So while we're um, good evening again. This is Radio Kosaten, number 6 edition of our radio program. Today is December 18, 18, right? So my memory about date is very bad. So anyway, welcome back again, and thank you for tuning into Radio Kosaten. And for today's radio show, we have Filipino scholars with us, and we will be talking about um, the recent issue in the Philippines about the contested hero's burial of late Ferdinand Marcos. So maybe I should give a little context background about the topic. So last month, November 18, the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos was given state honors and was buried in the hero's burial in Metro Manila amidst people's protest. So, but eventually the Supreme Court and the regime, the current regime, approved of this move by the Marcos family to bury the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. So after that, a few days later, people come out and protested, especially the younger generation of Filipino uh, who are categorized as the millennial generation. So hopefully in this discussion we could touch some issues about authoritarianism and global fascism, historical revisionism, and of course the millennial generation and the Filipino diaspora in Japan. So maybe before we start, we should give some introduction first from our guests. So we have our microphone.
Good evening. Hello. It's not a phone. I don't need to say hello. My name is Jera Lego. I until recently was a graduate student studying here in Japan. Been here for more than 9 years now, and this year I started working as a research associate at a think tank here in Tokyo. Um, yeah, that's it.
My name is Johanna Zulueta. I am currently assistant professor of sociology. I also do research on issues about migration. So I work at a private university in Tokyo.
Good evening. My name is Jenny De Dios. I've been in Tokyo for 9 years. I used to do research on Japanese Filipino children. I'm currently working as an English instructor.
I'm Rihanna Cruz, an undergraduate research exchange student from the University of the Philippines. And I've just been in Tokyo for less than a year.
So yes, okay, thank you. And I forgot to introduce the radio at the very beginning. So anyway, I'll introduce the radio. The Radio Kosaten is a migrant and refugee run internet community radio based in Tokyo. So that's good that we have guests that are into the fields of migration, migrants, and other related fields about this particular radio project that we're working. So yeah, before we start, maybe should just ask question perhaps about we had the previously we had the picnic protest that was held few weeks ago, last month, November 23rd, and that was in response protest that was going on that was held in the Philippines a few days after or during after the Marcos Boreal, and eventually this protest spread nationwide and it became a movement. And according to the media, the protest movement is a is a spearheaded by the millennial generation, which the Marcos loyalists criticized because they said that the millennial generation were not, they didn't experience the dictatorship, the martial law time during Marcos period, and so they don't have what's this the moral ground or some concrete grounding to criticize Marcos. So maybe we could start from there. And what is your opinion about this?
What is the question? What would you like to know about it? What opinion on what? How?
About since the Marcos loyalists were discrediting the
Um,
millennial generation who are at the backbone right now of this
mm,
movement that is the new movement that is happening now in the Philippines.
yeah. How do I feel about them discrediting?
Yes, yes.
Oh, um, I think well, it's not a very valid argument that just because you weren't there to experience something firsthand doesn't mean that you don't have a right to disagree with it or go against it. But um, I'd be a little careful with classifying the movement as a millennial movement because I think millennial is generational, right? So that's millennials are people from a certain age, younger than what did you find? What is a millennial?
Born in the 90s, 2000s.
Grew up, perhaps born after on in the year of the EDSA revolution and after, I guess, would be a safe um, the late latter half of the 1980s. But I believe the term is used loosely.
Right, yes.
I think it's like not all millennials support the movement, and it's just mostly millennials maybe in the Metro Manila area, where I think martial law had the biggest first-hand, um, most obvious, most um, obvious impact. Like most most of the activists were from the Metro Manila area during martial law. So I think um, their kids are the ones protesting now. Like I know my parents were, well, they weren't really activists, but they had experiences of like being caught during the curfew of martial law, or um, being scared that their university would be bombed during the time. So I think it's the movement is mostly Metro Manila based, maybe, and not little careful calling it a millennial movement. Yep.
So I guess what I had to consider ourselves millennial, but exactly I think it's beside the point if it's coming from the millennials or not. Strictly speaking, we I don't consider myself a millennial. So the point is not that if it's the millennials who are doing this or not. What I'm trying to say is that it seems to me really an attempt to discredit the the dissent that's coming out against, because it's the millennials you see them on Facebook, you see them face front on the camera, unabashedly protesting in their school uniforms with their hashtags and their curse words, you know. So they seem to be an easy target. At the same time, it also shows us how social media, how much technology is involved in the protest. But it's not limited to the millennials, and the millennials themselves distract us from the real issues.
But I think the fact that it could be branded as a millennial movement is that's a little it's a problem because so millennials are um, usually so students, maybe middle class, elite in maybe city centers and with access to social media. So this is maybe what big issue for us who are maybe have access to um, education, social media, mainstream media, but then most Filipinos who just don't have access to those channels and that level of that kind of information, it it doesn't really mean much to them. And I think those people without access to it are the majority, and those are the big voting blocks. So that's problematic. mm, that the movement is very big in social media but has little impact in real life. I think so.
I have a question related to that. If there's a separation of reality right now, the virtual reality, which is the social media, and the concrete reality, which is we don't hear about in social media. So I'm interested to know how this Marcus burial issue affect the people who are, not, it doesn't belong to this medium of technology, which is we call now as social media. Mm. Research and studied about migrant workers. I don't know if migrant workers here in Japan are into social media, or have they adapted to the technology as well.
Um, I really have right, and so they don't see any problem with the burial. In fact, many of them actually agree. It's not only in Japan, and I'm assuming it's also worldwide. But then, in terms of social media, I would assume that they are probably connected to Facebook at the very least, right? So we do not know their engagement with social media, how if they really use it that much. but I am assuming that they have access at least to simplest forms of social media.
Um, I wouldn't really discount the impact of social media that easily. For instance, they would say that the last election was won because that camp made good use of big data. It was the first time that they really uh, harvested this technology and used it to their advantage. We hear about these huge trolling machines and how a lot of these fake news going on. So even though not everyone has an iPhone, obviously, you'd be surprised how far in the most remote areas people have maybe a low-end phone, but somehow they have access to Facebook because the telecommunications company made it this way that they can access Facebook despite the limited data. So there's a huge reach, and I do wonder how widely this extends. So I think social media has a lot to do with it, but also I agree that we are in kind of these bubbles because
So moving from social media, uh, since we also touched the issue about Marcos loyalists, and probably some of them or most of them use social media as a medium to discredit the millennial movement. That of course, as Rihanna said, not all of the demography of the millennials are part of this anti Marcos burial. So I wanted to know how's the feeling. How do we counter the discredit, the discredit that the Marcos loyalists are saying on social media? Is it does it make sense really that since the millennials doesn't belong to that particular time in history, which is the martial law, that is it true that they should not be part of they should not be uh, criticizing Marcos? And yes, what can you say about this?
I think at the public forum that we had um, last week, there was a video where everything that the well the loyalists and I guess the apologists were coming out with all these claims about the supposed golden era of the Marcos years, which in the video, though all of those claims were countered point by point by factual evidence. So I think, well, not just discrediting the millennials from joining a protest, which um, protesting history that they had not lived through. But basically, anyone um, who tries to cover up those supposed golden years. I just say that we need to reach out more with facts, because of course people are always entitled to their own opinion. So many steps backward in terms of um, recognizing those human rights abuses. I suppose we had been making some strides towards rectifying, but then here comes an administration who has basically paved the way for such revision or
How what we should do? Oh, okay. um, well, I think um um we could go look into why are millennials protesting, because I think many of us were educated, we're taught that martial law was an affront to the human rights, to democracy, and to freedom of speech. Um, we were taught to be empathetic to the struggle of the activists of the time, even though we didn't experience it ourselves. So I think what is lacking at the moment, and maybe it's been lacking throughout Philippine history, is a sense of national, like claiming our national history, claiming the national identity, um, because for uh, for maybe my peers who might not have grown up hearing these stories of torture and imprisonment and repression during the martial law, even though they didn't grow up with those stories. And I grew up with those stories, so it was very easy for me to believe and empathize with those, with narratives like that. But then for some of my peers who didn't grow up with the same, hearing the same narratives, um, they were taught to they were they were taught those narratives, and then they learned to grow empathetic to it, though they didn't come from the same places where martial law had such a powerful impact. But then with people who don't have access to those stories, that to channels which to hear those narratives and that that chapter of our history, it may be difficult for them to claim it as part of their histories. And then it in general, I think it's difficult for the Philippines as a nation to claim a national history, because archipelago, so everyone has their own regional histories. And then so maybe in Ilocos martial law was very good, but then in other areas it wasn't. mm. So I think that's where the problem is. And that's why it's so easy for others to the our discredit the and discredit the movement now, and to accept Marcos burial now, because they grew up with other narratives, and then they weren't taught to be empathetic to the struggle, to their the activists who suffered torture and repression during the martial law. So they find it difficult to claim the 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 not so golden point, since they experienced something very different from it. Um, so I think like what Ate Jenny said, we should be a little more active in retelling these stories, and in retelling what we know happened during the time. But um, maybe we should be also a little empathetic. So we're asking them to be empathetic to the stories we know about what happened. But then we should also try to understand. So maybe a lot of them started out as anti. especially because I think Noynoy's period wasn't so bad economically, and then so they were they were releasing a lot of statements saying, "Oh, the economy is getting better. We're getting doing better as a country." I think what did they call us? A tiger economy for a bit. They said we were doing really well. It's like 6% GDP increase, but then yeah, we were doing really well, but then it wasn't so much felt by a lot of people. So and that's why it was so easy for them to be pro Marcos because they they hear the Aquino government saying, "Oh, we're doing really well," and they don't feel it. So we should be empathetic to them and understand that this is maybe this is where they're coming from. Mm, so
That I think there should be an institutionalization of um, memories and histories because you have to have a shared history because how many people really know what happened during the martial law era, right? So I think it's also connected to the education system. So of course, I am aware of what happened because it was taught in schools in history, in the history subjects in schools, right? But in other schools, in many schools, not only in the NCR region but even elsewhere. So how is history taught, right? So how is this particular issue taught? So that's really one question that we have to address. So it has to be institutionalized because we can only do so much. Because if you want to educate people, then it really has to come in the education system. And another thing is having markers that people can really see. Because abroad you have people who who are really made to be aware of what happened because they read it, they see it. Let's say you have markers, okay, this was where it occurred, this was a torture chamber, something like that. But we actually lack that, right? And there was this, and Rihanna was saying that because it has become like a pro anti, right? And so because people were in a way disappointed with the previous administration, many people, so they were thinking, oh, we have to go back to the golden years. So and they think that the Marcos era is actually golden years. So again, you have that attempt at revisional, I'm sorry, at historical revisionism, right? So yeah, so how do we address that? Because a lot of people were saying, oh, we had this, we had that during this time. And so martial law, it's only happened only in a particular area. But we also have to note that it was actually nationwide. And I think during the forum with Professor Kimpo, he mentioned that as well.
So yeah, just to add to that, no, and maybe relate it in the global context as well, since we have generations of people who were frustrated with the previous regimes that eventually, you know, um, produced a situation like this, right? Like going back to the Marcos, longing back to this golden, quote unquote, golden years of the Marcos times. This also happened in other parts of the world. For example, in the U.S., yeah, what produced Trump was because of the previous regimes and the government. Maybe that started from Bush to Obama, and then you have produced Trump from these people who were frustrated by the previous regimes. So I think it's some way common with the Philippine experience. So what produced the fascist or authoritarian government we have right now in under Duterte's regime was because of the previous regimes like Aquino and even further than Aquino himself or the mother, the Cory Aquino. And I think it has also has something to do with after the dictatorship during the 1986 when the people uprising, the people power uprising occurred. Uh, the government that followed after Marcos didn't really do anything, to to sup, to sup, to suppress the coming back of the dictatorship, which is the possibility right now, no? So going back to that point you just said about the markers in history and the issue on education, uh, some government agencies didn't really do some serious um, projects to to teach generations of students about the dark days or the dark history in Philippine history. So that is why we have generations right now who I believe the generation right now who are pro Duterte or pro Marcos was, I guess, from my generation, from the generation X. I assume, no, because it's during the 90s. It was the time where where you had a condition that is difficult to how do I say, very difficult to identify, and it was also the beginning of frustrations accumulated in time, and then they started to blame all regimes that happened, and until now you you have Ninoy Aquino previously to Duterte, and I don't know, maybe yeah, the large part of the people who are uh, supporters of this coming back to authoritarian desire for longing for an authoritarian government perhaps has something to do with my generation, the generation X. So would you like to add to that or question to that?
Okay, okay, the way I see it, and because I also have, I know people who actually thought of this, I mean, thought that this current administration will really bring about change, is because I think it's an anti establishment vote. Because you already have the elites, and it's always the elites, right? They're the ones controlling, basically, right? The oligarchs controlling the government. So even though, and I think one of you said that even though our economy really grew during the previous administration, it wasn't a really inclusive growth. And so I think because this person, Duterte, actually um, was packaged to really to to represent change, right, in the government, and have this political will to change the Philippines. So a lot of people saw that promising, right? Because okay, you have this person who is not really seen to be part of the political elite, although he is part of the political elite, to bring about change. And which is interesting because his if you look at the demographics, right, it's he really captured everyone. You have the ABC and the D and E. So you have middle classes, even some elites really voting for him, and the D and E classes. And of course, you also have the large part of the Visayas and Mindanao population who actually voted for him. So I do not know if people would want, if we can see it as a rise of authoritarianism in like the context, or fascism, as what is happening in the West, because I see it more that it might be as connected, but I see it more as a problem. It's really, I don't want to say something that is unique to the Philippine situation, but because you still have this divide between the elites and the others. And so you have people who are really becoming tired of the elites. And so there's this vote for Duterte. Right. But of course, we also should note that not all of the people who voted for Duterte also support Marcos.
Also answers to the question a while ago that we are trying to explore about the largest votes of Duterte coming from the migrant workers, no? Especially in Japan, which right now that we have a Marcos burial issue, it's very difficult for us to engage with them because probably they would, support the Marcos burial and even long for that desire to, go back to that quote unquote golden years of the dictatorship. So yes, I think yeah.
So I'm actually really concerned. I'm really worried that this will all get swept under the rug. Christmas season is coming up. Filipinos just get into the frenzy of Christmas and forget everything. But they recently announced that state university will be tuition free next year, and also more recently that hospitalization for indigents, or maybe I don't know if they extended the scope of the coverage, but hospitalization will be free for poor people. So there are all of these things that the administration is doing. It seems very good for the average person. And what do they care about history anyway? Because they're thinking about how to pay for their bills and where to get their next meal. It's really depressing. I was home recently. I was in a cab. I tried to engage my taxi driver. Sir, who did you vote for? What do you think about how things are going now? Do you feel that? Do you feel more secure these days? I has asked him these questions, so I was trying to get into his perception about these extrajudicial killings, and he says, it's really peaceful now. All those drug addicts are gone in our neighborhood, and I was thinking in my head, yeah, they're gone, they're dead. So I have all these questions myself. Like, how do we really engage? How do we really not let this get swept under the rug? Because revisionism has started, and before we know it, he's already there. He's already a hero as far as as a, yeah, 6 feet under, in a very fancy tomb, it seems, right? You're the host. Tell us.
Tell us what to do.
Okay, I'll just add to that about the question of what shall we do. I don't know actually what can we do, but perhaps through continuous dialogue, continuous reflection, asking questions, perhaps from here it could probably. And I think this is what I learned about the millennials, no? Because the millennials are very much adept into new technology, and new technology is characteristic to the concept of dialogue, of connecting, of engaging. And I think that's how the millennial generation who who made the first step to protest against the Marcos burial, it gave us a kind of hope, of that question of what can we do, what shall we do, what should be done, no? And yeah, we can learn from from this continuous practice of the millennials.
Can I add something? Since you wanted to include, what else is happening there in the rest of the world. So I'm somehow been paying attention to who Trump's been appointing again, which scary character is on his cabinet next. So I heard that climate scientists were actually copying all their data, moving it to some server in Canada, because they're afraid all this information could get wiped out under the Trump administration. And Stephen Colbert said, even facts are migrating to Canada. Goodbye empirical evidence. So it's really funny, but I think it tells a lot about this post-truth era that we have. So Jenny mentioned facts, right? And we all like to cling to our facts, but seems it's not enough. So I think it's these cold hard facts are not enough. We really need to engage people. And I feel guilty because I couldn't even continue my discussion with my cab driver when he said that
What
things were
happened?
peaceful in his neighborhood.
Oh.
So I didn't get into it anymore. So I think it's a question that really confronts us in the face. Like, how do you really go beyond your bubble and talk about this with feelings and not just cold hard facts?
Yeah. Could I add? Actually, also, I think the portfolio of the Pinoy administration was erased. Yeah, from gov.ph, which is the official website of the government. So it was erased, or it wasn't hosted anymore on the official government website. But they had a backup, so it's fine. Well, it's not fine, but they had a backup, so it still exists. Yeah. And I think what we should do is we should maybe be a little more conscious about how we're communicating, and also empathetic. So how we're communicating our facts. Or, so, like you said, it can't just be cold hard facts. I think also that was the problem with the Pinoy administration. They had facts, they were positive facts, but then people weren't able to feel the actual impact of the facts. But then we see Duterte, and then we have this underdog narrative like, oh, I didn't really want to be president, but the people call me. So, oh,
And his supporters are crazy for him.
yeah, yeah, because it's a really compelling narrative. Like, oh, this humble small town guy like me, and like, yeah, yeah, humble. Yeah. Yeah, but then like some small fish. But he had a
Yeah.
really compelling narrative.
Yes. Which is really bothering because the people who are killed are actually the poor people. So people really, to put it bluntly, really don't care, right? Because they have this, oh, they're probably drug addicts, right? Or drug pushers, right? But I think once the middle class is affected, then I think people will, I mean,
Yeah,
we will have this outrage now, right?
we haven't reached.
Yes.
It doesn't seem that we've reached that critical mass. For the enough people are outraged and find it unacceptable that we could actually do something about the current administration, and it's only been 6 months. Yay!
4,000 people dead.
Merry Christmas. So yeah, it's only been 6 months. I think people are, I think, are kind of in the mindset. Okay, let's give him a chance. Maybe these killings will, maybe they'll lessen. But I think even the Duterte said, well, I maybe 6 months was actually not enough. That he needed more time. He conceded.
Yeah, he said he's not going to rest until all 4 million drug addicts are dead.
Where does he get those numbers? I'd really like to know.
I don't think it's accurate, to be honest.
They don't come from the drug authority. So, even the Philippine Drug Authority said that his numbers aren't correct. So no, nobody really knows. Mm.
Maybe we should get questions from the back. Since Rihanna mentioned about communicating and not only facts but also empathy, and how do we empathize with, like for example, there are killings right now in the Philippines, and it's like more than 5,000 people are killed within 6 months, more than 6 months, because of Duterte's yeah, and it continues. The killings continues, and the number is, what worries me is that the killings has become normalized, no, and the people themselves. Okay, we have question. All right.
Yeah, on the subject of that being normalized, because I think they are trying to normalize it so that, because you were saying that you were worried, like, what if it, like it hasn't reached the middle class yet, and then you said that once it reaches middle class, then people start to make a clamor because like poor people are expendable. and no one really cares about them. However, this normalization, it feels like a tactic, because a friend of mine, are you familiar with Karen Bordador? She is this DJ on, yeah. So she's the sister of my friend, and her boyfriend's apartment was raided, and there were drugs in there, and she was there at the time. So she was arrested along with them, and so she is higher than working class. She's like AB, and the normalization of the killings has already begun because people didn't even care. It's like, oh, she's a drug addict too. She's a drug addict, so maybe you should shoot her too. And then it's like there's this discussion like, okay, so, and then now people are making a fuss that Karen Bordador has been arrested. Now people care. Now people are running, is she really a drug addict or is she not? It's like she's the one with the voice, and there's an argument, but then there's still the people who are like, oh no, just shoot her. Just like, she has the same rights as the people who are in the streets. So it's starting to trickle. So before, I think, like before it reaches critical mass, that we're like tired of everything, what they're actually doing is like slowly bringing it up. And then, yeah, so that's another side of the story.
Yes, and yes, I agree. What is interesting is because I was home just last week, and I also communicate with my family and friends, and they were telling me, you don't have to be worried because you are not using drugs. You're not a drug pusher. You're not one of those. Why will you be scared? So that is actually the how do you call it, the discourse, right? The mentality that's with the people. So if you're not doing anything wrong, why should you be scared? Yes, however, we know that a lot of people are, and they're innocent, they're being killed, right? But then there's always that. So you're not one of them, so why should you be scared?
Also, on that note, where you're not doing drug, you shouldn't be scared. But there are people who just look like they do drugs and they get shot, or they hurt. Like, even like if you see it in social media, there's that recent what's it, CNN or something, that they're making this documentary about the extrajudicial killings. Yeah, is it? And then the person who was doing the documentary, he had like a beard and long hair, and I was comments in social media cause cancer. So people were saying, well, tingnan mo naman siya, mukha siyang addict, baka kaya niya ginagawa yon. It's like the reason that he's doing this documentary, because he's an addict himself. Because look at him, he has tattoos. He's also an addict. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so how long before it starts, oh, look at her. She has like, red eyes. She's probably an addict, when you just worked overtime. So, and then it gives everybody the freedom to just shoot whoever they want and put a cardboard placard on them. So, it's not it starts with the poor because they're the ones who are easy to eliminate, but slowly that power is going to creep up to the educated sector.
That's a sad reality. Because mm,
I guess maybe the most essential core of the issue is people don't know their own rights and don't respect the rights of others. Like, so martial law, the right to freedom of speech was assaulted, and then now it's the right to due process and life. I think health, because I think the drug problem is a public health problem, so people don't feel that they have the right, or that people don't feel that other people have the right to receive health services for drug problems. So I guess we need more education. We need to educate people on the rights and the rights of others more. But then also that's difficult, because it's difficult to tell someone you have the right to do this, but actually your government can't support your right. So you have it, but then it doesn't actually exist in this country. So that's a problem we have. So just
So it's really the problem that suddenly due process doesn't matter. Suddenly, I forgot what I wanted to say. Suddenly it's okay for these things to happen because we have a drug problem, because we have this great and awesome guy who will fix everything for us because our country's in the shits or something like that. But it's not okay. And you would think that we've already had this conversation and that it shouldn't have to be rethought. But apparently, not enough people are in on this. As a country, apparently, we don't actually all agree that there has to be fair and due process, that everyone has to have equal access to justice. I mean, case in point, President himself has prescription for some drugs, right? But his defense is that he has a prescription. Or who was it? Arroyo's nephew got out on bail for possession of drugs. So
It's like booking a flight and you're only in economy class. So if the higher up you go, then the better, you know,
at least you get
justice
on the
will be
plane. Some people just
served.
get run over by the plane.
So people get, bumped off. So so yeah, yeah, that's a very sad analogy, but
I think going back to Jera's question a while ago about what should be done, no? It should maybe that question should also remind us as well about our activism, our our rightful claim for human rights and due process. So we have to always push for this, unless everything will be normalized and accept the reality that you can be killed anytime, even if you just look like a drug addict and you can be killed anytime, anywhere. So I think the the important thing right now is really to um, become more active, proactive, and perhaps the movement right now that's spearheaded by the millennial generation has to you know push through. And yeah, so any
Just to add, I think we are in a special position being overseas Filipinos because a large part of the population is overseas, and we are actually in a position to engage with them, really to talk to them, hopefully through forums, through other activities, and to know what they think of the issue, right? Because we can't just rely on social media, especially with the proliferation of fake news, right? So it's really hard to counter those fake news. So the one thing that we can do is to really engage overseas Filipinos, and perhaps if we are able to have a dialogue with them and to know their thoughts, and probably if we can also cause an outrage overseas, right? I mean, revolutions have been done, um, have changed countries because they started overseas. So I think it will be, it will be a big contribution to what's happening back home.
I think I recently read something about what you call it an action hour. So like for concrete actions we could do are I read that you could set aside 1 hour per week, and then for that 1 hour you be proactive. You could write a letter to your congressman about some law that you don't agree with. For example, recently we have the they're trying to push for to lower the age of criminal liability. So like you could for 1 hour a week, it's which is doable maybe. You could write to your congressman, or you could report the fake news and the fake troll accounts, or you could reply to some people commenting who might be misinformed. Like a few a few weeks ago, I think I replied to some commenters because the comment section causes cancer, right? So, but then I said, no, no, this is really wrong. I have to talk to you. So then I replied to maybe five, and then nobody really replied. Maybe they were troll accounts. So, but one person replied, and then he was actually open-minded. He said, "Oh, sorry, Iha. I was just frustrated. I didn't know that's what, because he said something about the CHR, and then, like, the CHR is for government assaults to human rights, not for PNP stuff. So like anyway, I clarified it, and then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that." And then he was the one who engaged me. He said, "Oh, are you from this university? Oh, I see that we have different perspectives to this issue. Could you please enlighten me?" And then I explained, "Yeah, amazing, no? Yeah, amazing." And then yeah, yeah, the others just didn't reply. And then I asked him too, like, "Oh, why do you believe that? What are the resources that you're looking into?" And then he linked me to some stuff, and then so yeah, maybe 1 hour a week we engage or write to someone and report fake news. And so that's maybe doable. Maybe 30 minutes a week if you're really really busy. 15 minutes. It took me 5 minutes to reply. So, yeah, that's doable. That's some concrete thing we could do. So, anyone?
So we only have another 5 minutes left. So yeah, maybe if there's any other points we should add, we could address it. Oh, there, yeah.
Actually, to add to what you were saying about, like trying to engage somebody 1 hour, yeah. The thing is, that's a good idea, but then it's also you have to support each other. Because the thing about, the comment section, they will gang up on you. They will be threatening.
I did a private message.
Yeah, but even like sometimes it's helpful to like do it on a public forum because because there's so much presence of the people who were for him and like you just blind followers or troll accounts, and so a lot of people are so afraid to speak out because they're gonna get attacked. And a lot of people, especially now with social media, the whole pasikatin natin to mentality, and nobody wants to be a target of that, especially when you think that nobody's gonna come and help you. So when you see somebody engage with them, support them, show them that they're not alone, show them that there are people on their side. So you're, and then just because these trolls are working together, so we have to do the same. If you see somebody drowning who's on your side, you don't let them drown, right? So that's in addition to your 5 minutes a day, maybe if you don't want to start the engagement, then support someone's engagement.
If you see something, say something.
Yes, exactly. Even if you don't want to start, support. Right? Some people are not meant to be leaders, but they're kick-ass supporters.
Or you could just report the accounts.
That too. That works too.
Yeah.
That's actually fun. It's very therapeutic.
Someone else says it doesn't go against the community standards.
Well, at least you tried.
Yeah, you try. So
We
that's
tried.
okay.
Yes.
They're actually they're actually, I'm not sure if I could say this, but there are actually some Facebook groups to report the troll accounts. So they post a list of the troll accounts, and they're like, "Okay, you report the trolls. These are," and then you see all the names that are obviously fake, and like, "Oh, okay," and then you report. So because the more people who report them, the more likely they are to get removed. Yeah, so yeah, those exist, but those could be abused. But then I like to believe that they mostly just report trolls and
But I wonder how the community of the poor community, express their feelings about this spate of killings, no, in their community, and I don't know if they could express this over social media, or should we engage them directly in their communities as well and listen to their perhaps feelings about what's going on. So yeah, not only social media, but we also have to engage, yeah, on the ground. And I think that's the legacy that the activists back during the Marcos years has left to us. They started going underground because the government will kill them the same way the Duterte government will kills the suspected looking personalities, from the poor community. So they started going underground and then talking directly, organizing with the farmers, the workers, and the urban poor.
They really went out there.
Yes, and it's a challenge for us right now who has this new technology that on us, on the
Right.
table that we could use.
It's
And
it's somehow should be easier to reach out to people, yet at the same time it's not, despite all of the channels available to us. So um, it's so easy to to like things. Oh, what he's saying is wrong, or what she's doing is wrong, and it's easy to like and then just comment. But how does that translate into real action? I think that's a huge challenge for us in this day and age.
so
So
that's a good question, the concluding question as well. Since we already used our time, and thank you so much for uh, uh, discussing this very important discussion. And yes, as a conclusion, engaging not only through facts but through empathy, communicating through empathy could probably perhaps uh, get the answer what Jera was asking about, and what can we do, what is to be done. So there is no definite answer. It could perhaps many answers. It has something to do with how we engage, how we do our engagement with people who are against our maybe our belief, or perhaps common with our beliefs as well. So this is a good thing that the millennial generation are in a period of time of complexity. It is totally different from my generation, Generation X. There's always a boundary. There's always difference, and there's always dichotomy. Yes. So yeah. So for for tonight's Radio Kosaten, thank you for listening, and yes, hopefully we could put this dialogue we had into action in the next few months and the next month, so next year. We are having a what's this struggle ahead that we have to confront.
yes. But still a few more weeks in 2016. So let's good luck, guys, surviving the last 2 weeks of 2016.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for having
much.
us.
Thank you for listening.